Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Today, we're going to do a little review of the 1950s television show Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, starring Irish McCalla. Now, this was a first-run syndicated series, so it wasn't being produced by NBC or ABC or CBS, and Dumont was already gone by that point. 26 episodes, only 13 seem to have survived from 1956. Now, Sheena, the character, started out in comics and was probably the first of the Jungle Queen comic book characters. Obviously, a sort of female version of Tarzan, which was already extremely popular, had been, running in pulps and elsewhere for decades. Sheena was created in 1938, so contemporaneous with Superman and Batman. And despite those two characters obviously doing much better in various mediums, Sheena might be just about as well known because of the nature of a scantily clad woman in leopard skins fighting bad guys in the jungle. Created by Jerry Iger, maybe with Will Eisner. Iger says no, Eisner had nothing to do with it. I don't know that Eisner ever disputed that in particular. So it's a Jerry Iger creation. And it was, your pretty standard jungle fare at the time. I mean, this is a whole subgenre, which I think in 2024 is more or less gone. I think it might possibly exist in parody at best. But it was once, with the introduction of Tarzan, it was a major subgenre of action and adventure from the 1900s through, into the 1980s. Although, it was kind of on its last legs by the time we got to the 1980s. So this was the stuff that had the, European heroine or hero, usually raised from childhood or from infancy in Africa. In Tarzan's case, it is by these somewhat intelligent apes called the Mangani. In Sheena's case, it's by a witch doctor. She had been down there. Her father was an adventurer. He was friends of this witch doctor, but accidentally drank the wrong potion and died. And so the witch doctor brings her up. So she is athletic and she is a fighter and she has some control over animals. And this was pretty standard for these kinds of characters. And you find tons of comic books and comic strips and movie serials and full-on movies. And for a long time, this was a big thing. Her comic, I think, survived into the 1950s. I believe that image is of a 3D version of the comic book, which was reprinted later with an amazing cover by Dave Stevens of Rocketeer fame. And this was a 3D comic. I don't have the glasses anymore, but to get an idea of what you can sort of see right now, what it looks like is unfocused. And that's because you have multiple lines that when you look through the glasses, make the characters stand out a little bit more. And in the 80s, 90s, when you got this sort of renaissance of Betty Page, of good girl art, as they call it, of just stuff from the 30s through the 50s, you see revivals of the character and stuff. Not that there weren't from before that, but for Gen X, it kind of became a thing, a desire to sort of get into, I don't know, this more fun mindset that people perceived. And for a lot of Gen Xers, without the hang-ups that were often associated with the period of exploitation and things of that nature, I think a lot of Gen X had kind of passed that stuff by And so now they just wanted to enjoy sort of the insanity, or, the fact that the artwork was often extremely good in these things. Just want to kind of enjoy it for those purposes. Well, in the 1950s, though, these kind of things were still a going concern. And so in 1956, they launched the show starring Irish McCalla. Now, she says in interviews that a producer, whomever, saw her on a Malibu beach throwing a bamboo spear and said, "That's our girl." She's 6'1". She had already worked at a pinup model, and she was pretty athletic. She apparently did do many stunts on the show, although one of them apparently broke her arm, and that was the end of the stunts. Or so she says. There's not a massive amount of information about this series out there. She has a chimpanzee companion. She has a hunter guide companion named Bob Reynolds, I think it was, who is sort of kind of like Steve Trevor to her Wonder Woman. And in the show, sometimes Bob is captured and she has to free him. Sometimes she's captured and he frees her. It's definitely a show that lets her be the heroine. It's not sort of like, here, stand there and look pretty, and we'll let the guys do what has to be done. No, she's a heroine. She's swinging from trees. She's throwing spears. She's getting into it. So it has that element, that athletic, adventurous element to it, which is nice. I mean, you would see that maybe more prominent in the late 60s, mid to late 60s with, Emma Peel and the Avengers, with Honey West on TV, and obviously becoming more prominent as time went by. But it does have that, that element to offer. It was panned by critics at the time, but they were kind of snarky, and they seemed like they were honestly kind of like buttholes. I mean, it was a kids show, which obviously had an element that was going to appeal to dads at the time. But it was a kids show. So, you need to judge it as such. Now, there would be follow-ups to this show. In the 1980s, you got a Sheena movie starring Tanya Roberts, which I guess did okay. Obviously, Tanya Roberts, the Beastmaster, sorry. She was on Charlie's Angels for a while. She was, maybe a lot of younger people will know her best as, I think as Midge on the 70s show. And, in the 2000s, Gina Lee Nolan did a TV series, also first-run syndication. Got 35 episodes, so it did a little bit better than the 50s series. And changed the character a little bit, kind of reminiscent of Xena, But if you watch either of those, here you had very attractive women, but didn't seem to be particularly athletic women. You kind of accept that they're Sheena because they're Sheena, but it doesn't seem like they're capable of doing any of this stuff. And one of the nice things about Irish McCalla is that she kind of did seem a little bit more athletic, a little bit more capable of doing the things that she's doing on screen. Not entirely. I mean, let's be honest, most of the guys in these things, you wouldn't expect them to be able to, to do all these amazing stunts. There's a few men in Hollywood history who could and did do some of their own stunts, but not a lot. But here's a woman who did. She had like I said, an athleticism, but also a charisma. She's made fun of her own acting. I think the quote is something like, I couldn't act, but I could swing from trees. I think she does fine with the material, because again, the material is primarily for children, and it's pretty standard of the sort of jungle adventure genre. You get a lot of stock footage of African animals and sometimes African tribes that could have been stock footage from 30 years earlier, for all you know. Bad guy shows up, bad guy does bad things. Sheena and Bob get involved and ultimately stop the bad guy from doing the bad things. And I will say, some of the bad guys in these series, these episodes that I was able to watch, they're pretty damn bad. I mean, they're straight up murderers. They're out to exploit the area, the tribes, the whatever, to get what they want. And they really don't care who they hurt to stop it. So you do get a pretty good dichotomy of good versus evil. And it does push, the idea of there are values, ethical, moral, etc. And we judge people by those values that they not only espouse, but actually demonstrate. And so in that regard, it's pretty good heroic fiction for kids, but there's nothing necessarily to separate it from anything else like this, including like the 1960s Tarzan with Ron Ely, or even to some degree Daktari in the 1960s, other than the fact that it stars Irish McCalla, And so the show kind of, I think it survived really because of Irish McCalla and because of her looks. She's very attractive. And you would find, in like 1990s Filmfax magazine, you would find the ads for Sheena videos. You can see one up here, whoops, in the corner. Jungle Video, Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, Ramar of the Jungle, etc. These are kind of videotapes that people traded, and that was probably people who were interested in the pinup aspect of Irish McCalla, and B, guys who were in their maybe at that time 50s or 60s who'd grown up on all the jungle movies and jungle TV shows, as kids, and so had a sort of nostalgic fondness for it. And so it's kind of sad in a way. Irish McCalla is the reason to watch this show, because of her poise and bearing. And she seems pretty cool. And like I said, I think she does a good job with the material that she had to work with. It's not Emmy Award winning stuff. Sadly, I think for a lot of people, the reason they look at it is because Irish McCalla is hot. And that's it. And I don't think that's really fair. I think she does a good job with it. And it's a decent show for what it is. But it's not a show that stands out. You don't come away going, oh, that was amazing. But I had a good time watching it. I enjoyed it. I didn't, I tend to watch these things on a weekly schedule. I don't want to binge them. I like to space it out a little bit. And generally speaking, when the day came by that I was going to watch a Sheena episode, I was down with it. It was fun. The copies are not good, which is why you're not getting a lot of images. The copies that I was able to watch on Tubi were pretty rough. Sound was not great. Unfortunately, that's how it goes with things like this. They're old. They weren't well cared for. And frankly, there's a lot of other big kids shows from the 50s that you don't even have 13 episodes from. But the ones that there are, it's enjoyable. And I think if you are going to take the time to watch it for her. Watch it for Irish. She's the reason. She's the standout on the show. If you want to do it in a creepy way, go ahead. But I think she's really cool. I think she was a real legit, heroine of action adventure shows from that period, and I think should be respected in that regard. She took. From what I could tell, she took the show seriously, as much as it was often kind of a little more lighthearted, or at least not real serious, not real grave. It was a kid's show, but she took it seriously, and I think she did a good job with it, just like you would say Roy Rogers or Gene Autry did. I mean, those are not deep movies, but those guys committed to the part that they played, and, they tried to make something that they thought genuinely would be good for kids to watch. And I think Sheena, at least especially for that time period, certainly is. It's a show that values individuals, and values good values, and does a good job with all that. So there you go. Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, 1956. 26 episodes, but from what I've seen, about 13 of them survive. worth giving it a watch if, you have that nostalgia or you enjoy the jungle adventure type stuff, which I'll be honest with you, I've never been that into. They do seem to be pretty repetitive. But given that, I think Irish McCalla kind of lifts the thing up to a slightly higher level and makes the show worth watching. Hey, are you a fan of the old jungle serials or the old Tarzan movies? Are you a fan of Sheena? Did you read the comic books? Did you get any of the revival comics later on? Fan of the movie? Fan of the later TV series? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, I'd love to help answer them if I can. I think the show's worth watching. It was fun. It was a pleasant little show. So in the meantime, before we get to our next video in a couple, 3 days, God bless everybody. Try to be kind to one another, as Sheena would have you do. And try to have some fun. And I'll see you next time on Dad's Den of Pop Culture.